September 30th on CNN.
Welcome back to CNN's Republican presidential debate at the Reagan Library here in Simi Valley, California. Many people on social media wanted us to ask about marijuana legalization. Senator Paul, Governor Christie recently said, quote, "If you're getting high in Colorado today, where marijuana has been legalized, enjoy it until January 2017, because I will enforce the federal laws against marijuana." Will you?
I think one of the great problems and what the American people don't like about politics is hypocrisy. People who have one standard for others and not for themselves. There's at least one prominent example on the stage of someone who says they smoked pot in high school. And yet the people who are going to jail for this are poor people, often African Americans and often Hispanics, and yet the rich kids who use drugs aren't. I personally think that this is a crime for which the only victim is the individual. And I think that America has to take a different attitude. I'd like to see more rehabilitation and less incarceration. I'm a fan of the drug courts, which try to direct you back towards work and less time in jail. But the bottom line is the states, we say we like the 10th Amendment until we start talking about this. And I think the federal government's gone too far. I think that the war on drugs has had a racial outcome and really has been something that's really damaged our inner cities. Not only do the drugs damage them, we damage them again by incarcerating them and then preventing them from getting employment over time. So I don't think that the federal government should override the states. I believe in the 10th Amendment, and I really will say that the states are left to themselves.
I want to give the person that you called a hypocrite an opportunity to respond. Do you want to identify that person?
Well, I think if we left it open, we could see how many people smoked pot in high school.
Is there somebody you were specifically thinking of?
Well, you know, the thing is...
He was talking about me.
Yeah, I was talking
about...
That's
what I thought, but I wanted him to say it.
I wanted to make it easier for him, and I just did.
Governor Bush, please.
So 40 years ago, I smoked marijuana, and I admit it. I'm sure that other people might have done it and may not want to say it in front of 25 million people. My mom's not happy that I just did. That's true. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. We have a serious epidemic of drugs that goes way beyond marijuana. What goes on in Colorado, as far as I'm concerned, that should be a state decision. But if you look at the problem of drugs in this society today, it's a serious problem. Rand, you know this because you're campaigning in New Hampshire like all of us, and you see the epidemic of heroin, the overdoses of heroin that's taking place. People's families are being torn apart. It is appropriate for the government to play a consistent role to be able to provide more treatment, more prevention. We're the state that has the most drug courts across every circuit. In Florida, there are drug courts to give people a second chance. That's the best way to do this.
But let me respond. The thing is that in Florida, Governor Bush campaigned against medical marijuana. That means that a small child like Morgan Hintz that has 500 seizures a day, is failing on 9 traditional medications, is not allowed to use cannabis oil, and that if they attempt to do that in Florida, they will take the child away, they will put the parents in jail, and that's what that means. If you're against allowing people to use medical marijuana, you'll actually put them in jail.
Right,
and actually, under the current circumstances, kids who had privilege like you do don't go to jail, but the poor kids in our inner cities go to jail. I don't think that's fair, and I think that we need to acknowledge it, and it is hypocritical to still want to put poor people in jail.
I don't want to put poor people in jail, Rand.
Well,
here's the deal.
You oppose medical marijuana?
No, I did not oppose when the legislature passed the bill to deal with that very issue. That's the way to solve this problem. Medical marijuana on the ballot was opened up. There's a huge loophole. And it was the first step towards getting to a Colorado place. And as a citizen of Florida, I voted no.
But that means you'll put people in jail.
I want to go right now. I want to go right now.
Jake, you brought my issue up.
That's true. Go ahead, Christine, please.
You know, I enjoyed the interplay. Thank you, gentlemen. I just say this. You know, first off, New Jersey is the first state in the nation that now says if you are a nonviolent, non-dealing drug user, that you don't go to jail for your first offense. You go to mandatory treatment. You see, as Jake, I'm pro-life. And I think you need to be pro-life for more than just the time in the womb. It gets a lot tougher when they get out of the womb. And when they're the 16-year-old drug addict on the floor of the county lockup, that life is just as precious as the life in the womb. And so that's why I'm for rehabilitation, why I think the war on drugs has been a failure. But I'll end with this. That doesn't mean we should be legalizing gateway drugs. And if Senator Paul thinks that the only victim is the person, Look at the decrease in productivity. Look at the way people get used and move on to other drugs when they use marijuana as a gateway drug. It's not them that are the only victims. Their families are the victims too. Their children are the victims too. And their employers are the victims also. And that's why I'll enforce the federal law, while you can still put an emphasis on rehabilitation, which we've done in New Jersey.
Yeah, you may respond, and then I'll bring in you, Ms. Fiorina.
Understand what they're saying. If they're going to say we are going to enforce the federal law against what the state law is, they aren't really believing in the 10th Amendment. Governor Christie would go into Colorado, and if you're breaking any federal law on marijuana, even though the state law allows it, he would put you in jail. If a young mother is trying to give her child cannabis oil for medical marijuana for seizure treatment, he would put her in jail if it violates federal law. I would let Colorado do what the 10th Amendment says. This power, we were never intended to have crime dealing at the federal level. Crime was supposed to be left to the states. Colorado's made their decision, and I don't want the federal government interfering and putting moms in jail who are simply trying to get medicine for their kid.
And Senator Paul knows that that's simply not the truth. In New Jersey, we have medical marijuana laws, which I've supported and implemented. This is not medical marijuana. This goes a much further step beyond. This is recreational use of marijuana. This is much different. And so while he'd like to use a sympathetic story to back up his point, it doesn't work. I'm not against medical marijuana. We do it in New Jersey. But I am against the recreational use of marijuana. If he wants to change the federal law, get Congress to pass the law to change it and get a president to sign it.
May I respond?
Yes, Senator Paul.
Here's the thing, is he doesn't want to make it about medical marijuana, but what if New Jersey's medical marijuana contradicts the federal law? He's saying he will send the federal government in and he will enforce the federal law. That's not consistent with the 10th Amendment. It's not consistent with states' rights, and it's not consistent with a conservative vision for the country. I don't think we should be sending the federal police in to arrest a mother and separate them from their child for giving a medicine to their child for seizures.
And Jake,
I want to bring in Ms. Fiorina. I want to bring in Ms. Fiorina on this issue.
I very much hope that I am the only person on this stage who can say this, but I know there are millions of Americans out there who will say the same thing. My husband Frank and I buried a child to drug addiction. So we must invest more in the treatment of drugs. I agree with Senator Paul. I agree with states' rights. But we are misleading young people when we tell them that marijuana is just like having a beer. It's not. And the marijuana that kids are smoking today is not the same as the marijuana that Jeb Bush smoked 40 years ago. We do. Sorry, Barbara. We do need criminal justice reform. We have the highest incarceration rates in the world. 2/3 of the people in our prisons are there for nonviolent offenses, mostly drug-related. It's clearly not working. But we need to tell young people the truth. Drug addiction is an epidemic, and it is taking too many of our young people. I know this, sadly, from personal experience.
Hugh Hewitt, I'd like to...
Thank you, Jake. Tomorrow is, Republicans know this, tomorrow is Constitution Day. We've been talking about the 10th Amendment. Let's talk about the Second Amendment. Governor Bush, one of the things the Supreme Court has gotten right is that it's an individual right. It's protected for individuals to hold it. Last week you said the next step in gun issues is to make sure they're not in the hands of the mentally ill. In this state, there's a controversial law that allows guns to be taken away from people without a hearing. Where does it go? And the problem of violence is endemic, but where does it go from what you said last week? How far into people's lives to take guns away from them?
Not very far. I think we need to do this state by state. There are places that get this right, and we need to make sure that we protect privacy laws. This is a complicated place. But I do think the natural impulse on the left, Hillary Clinton, immediately after one of these horrific violent acts took place, immediately said we need to have federal gun laws. President Obama, almost reflexively, always says the same thing. And the net result is you're going to take away rights of law-abiding citizens, the 99.999% of the people that are law-abiding citizens. That's not the right approach to do it. In Florida, we have a background check. We have concealed weapon permit holders. In fact, there's 1,200,000 of them. We have a reduction in violent crime because we put people behind bars when they use a gun in the commission of a crime. That's the better approach. But we're living in a society today where despair kind of grows in isolation.
If a family member calls and says, my child, my brother, my sister is disturbed, ought the state be able to go and get their weapon without a hearing?
I think there needs to be a hearing, but the fact is we need to encourage that kind of involvement. That's exactly what we need to do.
Here, Hugh, and there's a broader issue here as well. First of all, the only people that follow the law are law-abiding people. Criminals, by definition, ignore the law. So you can pass all the gun laws in the world like the left wants. The criminals are going to ignore it because they are criminals. Here's the real issue. The real issue is not what are people using to commit violence, but why are they committing the violence? And here's the truth. Because you cannot separate the social, moral well-being of your people from their economic and other well-being. You cannot separate it. You can't have a strong country without strong people. You cannot have strong people without strong values. And you cannot have strong values without strong families and the institutions in this country that defend and support those families. Well, and today we have a left-wing government under this president that is undermining all of the institutions in society that support the family and teach those values.
Senator Cruz, I wanted to go to you. You're a constitutional litigator. Are you afraid of the next step theory of what happens to Second Amendment rights?
I am not, and you mentioned that the U.S. Supreme Court had rightly upheld the individual right to keep and bear arms. I was proud to lead 31 states before the U.S. Supreme Court defending the Second Amendment, and we won that landmark victory. And indeed, just a couple of years ago, when Harry Reid and Barack Obama came after the right to keep and bear arms of millions of Americans, I was proud to lead the fight in the United States Senate to protect our right to keep and bear arms. And for that reason, I was honored to be endorsed by Gun Owners of America as the strongest supporter of the Second Amendment on this stage today, and I will fight every day to defend the Bill of Rights.
I'd like to turn to Dana Bash.
Mr. Trump, you have said once or twice that you are really rich, and you are by far the richest person on this stage. Chris Christie says billionaires like you, and even people who make and earn far less, should no longer get Social Security, or at least there should be limits based on the income. You think he's wrong? And if so, why?
Speaking for myself, I'm okay with it. I think there's a certain truth to it. I know people that, frankly, it has no impact on their life whatsoever. There are many people. I would almost say leave it up to them, but I would be willing to check it off and say I will not get Social Security.
What about the country as a policy?
As a policy, I would almost leave it up to the people. Don't forget, they pay in, and maybe they do well, and maybe some people want it. But the fact is that there are people that truly don't need it, and there are many people that do need it very, very badly. And I would be willing to write mine off 100%, Dana.
So is a voluntary program a way to get the Social Security system solvent again, like that?
No, it's not. But when Donald did it, it's a good start. That's really good. No, listen. This is an issue that we've got to talk about, and we haven't talked about yet. 71% of all federal spending is on entitlements and debt service. When John Kennedy was elected president in 1960, it was 26%. Harvard and Dartmouth says that Social Security is going to go insolvent in 7 to 8 years. So what I say is very simple. We need to save this program for the good people out there who have paid into the system and need it. And if that means making sure that folks like Donald and many of us on this stage don't get it, that's the right thing to do, because here's what Hillary Clinton's going to want to do. She's going to want to put more money into a system that has already lied to us and stolen from us. This government doesn't need more money to make Social Security solvent. We need to be not paying out benefits to people who don't really need it. We need to protect the people whose Social Security means the difference between between heat and rent and food. That's why I put out the proposal, and that's the people I'm trying to protect.
Governor Christie's right about Social Security.
Thank you, Governor. I'm coming to you right now on a separate issue,
well,
sir.
We've received
a lot of questions from social media about climate change. Senator Rubio, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State George Shultz reminds us that when Reagan was president, he faced a similar situation to the one that we're facing now. There were dire warnings from the mass consensus of the scientific community about the ozone layer shrinking. Shultz says Ronald Reagan urged skeptics in industry to come up with a plan. He said, do it as an insurance policy in case the scientists are right. The scientists were right. Reagan and his approach worked. Secretary Shultz asks, why not take out an insurance policy and approach climate change the Reagan way?
Because we're not going to destroy our economy the way the left-wing government that we are under now wants to do.
We're citing George Shultz.
Well, I don't. He may have lined up with their positions on this issue, but here's the bottom line. Every proposal they put forward are going to be proposals that will make it harder to do business in America, that will make it harder to create jobs in America. Single parents are already struggling across this country to provide provide for their families. Maybe a billionaire here in California can afford an increase in their utility rates, but a working family in Tampa, Florida, or anywhere across this country cannot afford it. So we are not going to destroy our economy. We are not going to make America a harder place to create jobs in order to pursue policies that will do absolutely nothing to change our economy, to change our climate, to change our weather, because America is a lot of things. The greatest country in the world, absolutely, but America is not a planet. And we are not even the largest carbon producer anymore. China is. And they're drilling a hole and digging anywhere in the world that they can get a hold of. So the bottom line is, I am not in favor of any policies that make America a harder place for people to live or to work or to raise their families.
Governor Christie, you have said that climate change is real and that humans help contribute to it. Without getting into the issue of China versus the United States, which I understand you've talked about before, what do you make of skeptics of climate change, such as Senator Rubio?
I don't think Senator Rubio is a skeptic of climate change. I think what Senator Rubio said I agree with. That, in fact, we don't need this massive government intervention to deal with the problem. Look at what we've done in New Jersey. We've already reached our clean air goals for 2020, and when I was governor, I pulled out of the regional cap-and-trade deal, the only state in the Northeast that did that. And we still reached our goals. Why? Because 53% of our electricity comes from nuclear. We use natural gas. We use solar power. We're the third highest using solar power state. You know why? Because we made all of those things economically feasible. I agree with Marco. We shouldn't be destroying our economy in order to chase some wild left-wing idea that somehow us by ourselves is going to fix the climate. We can contribute to that and be economically sound. We've proven that we could do that in New Jersey. Nuclear needs to be back on the table in a significant way in this country if we want to go after this problem.
Just for the record, I was citing Secretary of State George Shultz, Ronald Reagan Secretary of State, who I don't think anybody would call him left-wing.
No, listen, everybody makes a mistake every once in a while, Jake, even George Shultz. And if that's truly a representation of what he believes we should be doing, then with all due respect to the former Secretary of State, I disagree with him.
Jake, you mentioned me and called me a denier. Let me say, climate change...
I called you a skeptic.
Okay, a skeptic. You know, you can measure the climate. You can measure it. That's not the issue we're discussing. Here's what I'm skeptical of. I'm skeptical of the decisions that the left wants us to make. Because I know the impact those are going to have, and they're all going to be on our economy. They will not do a thing to lower the rise of the sea. They will not do a thing to cure the drought here in California. But what they will do is they will make America a more expensive place to create jobs. And today, with millions of people watching this broadcast that are struggling paycheck to paycheck, that do not know how they're going to pay their bills at the end of this month, I am not in favor of anything that is going to make it harder for them to raise their family.
And Thank you, Senator. I want to go to another question right now. I want to go to another question.
Jake, a lot of those people, though, and I'm going to echo what Senator Rubio just said. This is an issue where we're talking about in my state, it's thousands of manufacturing jobs. Thousands of manufacturing jobs for a rule the Obama administration, as EPA has said, will have a marginal impact on climate change. So we're going to put thousands and thousands of jobs in my state. I think it's something like 30,000 in Ohio, other states across this country. We're going to put people, manufacturing jobs, the kind of jobs that are far greater than the minimum wage. This administration is willing to put at risk for something its own EPA says is marginal.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. I'm turning to another issue right now. I'm turning to another issue right now, Senator Cruz. Well, I think we've heard from several this evening. A backlash against vaccines was blamed for a measles outbreak here in California. Dr. Carson, Donald Trump has publicly and repeatedly linked vaccines, childhood vaccines, to autism, which, as you know, the medical community adamantly disputes. You're a pediatric neurosurgeon. Should Mr. Trump stop saying this?
Well, let me put it this way. There have been numerous studies, and they have not demonstrated that there's any correlation between vaccinations and autism. This was something that was spread widely 15 or 20 years ago, and it has not been adequately revealed to the public what's actually going on. Vaccines are very important, certain ones, the ones that would prevent death or crippling. There are others, a multitude of vaccines which probably don't fit in that category, and there should be some discretion in those cases. But, a lot of this is pushed by big government, and I think that's one of the things that people so vehemently want to get rid of big government. We have 4.1 million federal employees, 650 federal agencies and department. That's why they have to take so much of our taxes.
Should he stop saying it? Should he stop saying the vaccines cause autism?
Well, I've just explained it to him. He can read about it if he wants to. I think he's an intelligent man and will make the correct decision after getting the real facts.
Mr. Trump, as president,
Well,
you would.
I'd like to respond.
I'm going right to you.
I'd like to
Mr. Trump,
respond.
as president, you would be in charge of the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health, both of which say you are wrong. How would you handle this as president?
Autism has become an epidemic. 25 years ago, 35 years ago, you look at the statistics, not even close. It has gotten totally out of control. I am totally in favor of vaccines, but I want smaller doses over a longer period of time. Because you take a baby in, and I've seen it, and I had my children taken care of over a long period of time, over a 2 or 3 year period of time, same exact amount. But you take this little beautiful baby and you pump, it looks just like it's meant for a horse, not for a child. And we've had so many instances, people that work for me just the other day, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, a child, a beautiful child, went to have the vaccine and came back and a week later got a tremendous fever, got very, very sick, now is autistic. I only say I'm in favor of vaccines. Do them over a longer period of time, same amount.
Thank you.
Just in little sections.
Dr. Carson.
And I think you're going to see a big impact on autism.
Dr. Carson, you just heard his medical take.
He's an okay doctor. Okay. But, the fact of the matter is, we have extremely well-documented proof that there's no autism associated with vaccinations. But it is true that we are probably giving way too many in too short a period of time. And a lot of pediatricians now recognize that, and I think are cutting down on the number and the proximity in which those are done.
And
I
that's
think
all
that's
I'm saying, Jake. That's all I'm saying.
Dr. Paul, I'd like to bring you in.
A second opinion? One of the greatest medical discoveries of all time were the vaccines, particularly for smallpox. And if you want to read a story, it's called The Speckled Monster. It's an amazing story. It was all done voluntarily, but people came in by the droves. George Washington wouldn't let his wife visit until she got vaccinated. So I'm all for vaccines, but I'm also for freedom. I'm also a little concerned about how they're bunched up. My kids had all of their vaccines, and even if the science doesn't say bunching them up's a problem, I ought to have the right to spread my vaccines out a little bit at the very least.
All right, thank you so much. Coming up,
Jake.
I'm sorry, Governor Huckabee, please.
I think we need to remember that there are maybe some controversies about autism, but there's no controversy about the things that are really driving the medical costs in this country. And I would really believe that the next president ought to declare a war on cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's, because those are the 4 things that are causing the greatest level of cost. John Kennedy said we'll go to the moon in a decade and bring a man back, and we did it. I grew up in the 50s. I remember the polio vaccine. We saved billions of dollars since that time because we haven't had to treat for polio. Why doesn't this country focus on cures rather than treatment? Why don't we put a definitive focus scientifically on finding the cure for cancer, for heart disease, for diabetes, and for Alzheimer's, a disease alone that will cost us $1.1 trillion by the year 2050.
Thank you, Governor.
We change the economy and the country.
We have to take another quick break. Coming up, Ronald Reagan looming large over this debate. So how Reagan-esque exactly are these Republicans? We will find out next.